everyone, and welcome to this webinar, this IAM webinar. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Jack Gu, who's going to take us through some information associated with Property Resilience Assessment Guide. So Jack heads up one of our knowledge groups associated with resilience. And I'm going to hand over to Jack in a minute and just let him introduce himself, and then he can take you through his presentation. We are going to take questions in Slido. So I'll make sure I put the Slido code into chat. So if you go across to chat, you'll see that the Slido code will appear in chat. So do please put your questions into chat, into Slido, so that other people can vote for them, etc. The session will run for about 30 minutes or so, and then Jack will leave lots of time for questions. So please do pop some questions into chat. We are recording the session, and so you will be able to watch it back, and we will make the slides available if Jack's happy with that, and we'll make those available with the recording as a PDF. One thing you just need to bear in mind for this session is, unfortunately, for some reason, our cameras aren't working, so you won't be able to see Jack, and you can't see me, but you will be able to hear him. So we decided to go ahead with the scheduled plan rather than mess around trying to get the cameras to work. So hopefully that's okay. So I'm going to hand over to Jack now, and then I'll join Jack a bit later on when we're doing questions. So remember, please do pop any questions you have into Slido, and the code is in chat, and it's 4195679. But it's in chat if you want to be able to pop any questions in. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks, Ursula, for the kind introduction. I guess I'll be the man of mystery today without the camera. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your interest in this webinar on the ASTM Property Resilience Guide. Before I start, I'd like to do a quick apologies that I am currently fighting a bad allergy, not allergy, but a throat infection and a cold. So if my voice sounds coarse and you couldn't hear me clearly, just let me know. I'm happy to repeat things. So my name is Jack Wool. I am the founding principal of Connecticut Risk, which is a climate and natural hazard risk consultant for critical facilities. And we operate in Toronto, Canada. I also chair the IAM Resilience Group, which is responsible for developing and disseminating knowledge to help asset owners achieve resilience within their organization. So today, I'm delighted to be introducing the new ASTM guide on property resilience assessment on behalf of the ASTM task group for which I serve. So my slides are essentially divided into two parts. The first will go over sort of the guide's intention and scope, along with some key elements of the developmental process. And the second part will focus a little bit on what does it mean to actually the IAM community, especially what are the use cases for asset management. So let me see if I can just advance the slides. There we go. So before I talk about the ASTM guide, just a quick word about ASTM as an organization for those of you who are not familiar. So the ASTM is the American Society of Testing Materials. It is basically a consensus-based standard-making organization, and it relies really just on volunteer experts to come together to develop sort of agreed-upon approaches to solve industrial issues. The ASTM provides a balanced process that is impartial, inclusive, and it gives an opportunity for end users of these standards to collaborate with professionals working in the area. So there are two types of ASTM documents. Probably the one that is familiar for most is the ASTM standards. These are sort of open and transparent consensus-based guidance with prescriptive requirements and clear criteria for practice area. So perhaps some of you work with real property, commercial properties, and you probably dealt with ASTM standards for instance, for probable maximum loss and earthquake risk for properties, that's the YE 2557. For property conditional assessment, that's the YE 2018. So there is about half a dozen of these standards that's already in place in the sort of commercial real property world. On the other hand, something that is relatively newer that the ASTM produces what they call a guide. A guide, contrary to an ASTM standard with prescriptive requirements, is meant to offer a framework and recommendations for practice area without constraining to essentially prescriptive requirements, which means that it offers flexibility that allows the user to adapt the guidance to their specific context. Now, the first focus of the task group, which is WK62996, as the group behind this guide, is to create this ASTM guide to provide directional guidance for assessing resilience of individual properties based on consensus viewpoints across different industrial sectors. And as you'll see later, the guide, although its focus is on property resilience, it also offers an aspect on how that relates to sort of the resilience of the community in which the property resides. But the important thing to remember here is what we have is a property assessment, resilience assessment guide, not a standard, and that it's flexible and it's meant to be adopted to sort of different organizational contexts. Okay. So the obvious question is, why do we need a property resilience assessment guide? What does it even mean to have property resilience assessment? Well, there are several driving factors that motivate sort of the task group to develop a guide. Many of you may be familiar with the factors driving sort of a big focus these past few years on climate risk, and particularly in real assets. This includes emerging regulatory requirements for legal and financial compliance. There's obviously the rising costs and dwindling availability of commercial P&C insurance. That's something that we talked about in last week's webinar. The impacts of future property value is something that asset owners obviously care very much about, as well as how asset owners can effectively improve the underlying risk management process to account for these risks, not just climate, but all sorts of natural hazard risk. The task group also recognizes that currently, in the horizon of current consulting and data service providers, there is very large difference in scope, in depth, and the type of information being offered. So this makes it very difficult to draw useful conclusions from many asset management activities and to provide consistent narrative across various end users. And if you think about it in the context of a property owner, the sectors that you may be involved with on a sort of daily operation basis might be, obviously the operations themselves, the lenders, so the financial people, investors, as well as insurers and regulatory enforcement. So we wanted to actually create a guide which will unify at least the metrics and the approach of all these different sectors who are potential users of these sort of assessments. So here's just a quick summary of sort of the climate risk drivers, more or less along the lines of what we just talked about. So the driver for understanding climate risk, or rather, climate risk is a major driver in sort of this property resilience guideline. And these can be separated into more specific categories dealing with investor relations, protect and preserve value of your properties, a general integrated risk management process to avoid losses and enhance business continuity or operational continuity. Exit strategies, this is something that's more applicable to real property firms, and insurance coverage, as well as to address regulatory pressures. I'll give you a couple of examples of how these factors manifest in the past couple of years, right? In terms of risk management, which is sort of the area that I deal with most often, I know there's a lot of IAM members who own public assets and critical infrastructure. Often a major catastrophe like a major riverine flood or pluvial flood can cause huge disruption to services. In fact, we had one a couple of weeks ago in Toronto. Interestingly, Toronto suffered two separate sort of 100-year level floods within a period of approximately 10 years. And I just mentioned the last one happened a couple of weeks ago in July, causing widespread disruption to subways and airport operations. We have patches of the city that lost power for more than 10 hours, and both events have an estimated insured loss of over $1 billion. And the uninsured loss, which is borne by the owner, it's likely to be several times more. Right, so addressing this kind of risk we know is pressing because a lot of this is exacerbated by the climate change. But aside from this, For those of you who were in the IAM webinar on the role of insurance last week,